Daily Devotional. Today's topic, resting in the Lord. I'm starting this particular passage off in Isaiah 30, verses 15 to 21. I wanted to share something with you. Been on a sabbatical here for the last few weeks. And the reason why is I want to make sure that this is what God is calling me to do. I know I don't get a lot of fanfare from it, and I know that I shouldn't expect that if I'm doing it for Him and not for myself. But I realize that it really seeps deep within me to make sure that this is not something that I came up with, and it's something that He's asking me to do. So one of the things I was learning to do was to rest in Him. This particular passage in the Bible in Isaiah is really talking about how the Jews were the only professing people that God had in the world, but yet many of them preferred darkness and their evil ways over listening to Him. I realize that most of us go through seasons where we can find in these type of passages today, in some ways it may be an upheaval in our lives, but I realize that God clearly specified to the people of Israel that He could save them from their enemies if they would just stop long enough to rest. But what God was really waiting for them to do was to show them how quickly He could deliver them from their plight, but yet they chose to run into places like Egypt for protection. And what they failed to do in their God-given ability to repent in quietness and rest was that they couldn't trust God's grace or even wait for Him to restore them by their darkness and choosing their own way. Now, I realized that God would have none of this at all in doing what was going on, and that He was giving them a very sharp, stark reminder that relying on their own efforts to try to do anything was going to fail miserably. Now, let me stop for a second. That goes for us too. When we think that we're in control and we got a good job, we're making good money, and we're doing whatever we want, we think that we don't need God. Well, what we don't realize is that the breath that we took today, that's today, is coming from Him. So many people didn't take that breath today, but yet here we are, fortunate enough for you to be able to hear me sharing what God has given to me to share with you. What we have to learn to do, though, is to accept God's invitation to truly trust and really rest when we're tempted to make our own hands the matters of our direction. Now that sounds kind of weird when I say it that way, but what I'm really trying to say is that we don't have a hope. Our own hope is in ourselves. And no matter how bleak or terrible or uncertain the particular circumstances may seem at that point, because we realize that when we do it our way, we have to accept the circumstances for what happens. When we do it God's way, we accept God's circumstances in the situation. Sounds kind of strange when I say it that way, doesn't it? Let me give it another little twist. God is our constant source of security. And if He's our protector, then all the circumstances are in His hands. All the outcomes are in His hands. All the opportunities of the outcomes are in His hands. And we can be really, truly when we face difficulties and troubles and uncertainties in our lives. Getting bad news or uncertain news about anything tends to make us stop in our tracks, especially as men, to try to think, how can we fix this? What can we do to make a change to allow the outcome to be in our favor? I'm not saying you can't, but what happens in the end is that you may get it your way, but the future is not clear to see in what comes out of that. I realize that my confidence and obedience in the Lord has got to be consistent if I'm going to see Him enable me to experience the true peace through my circumstances, even when there's such chaos all around me. What do I mean by that? So well, I don't have chaos all around me. Well, think about this. If you found out that your bank was compromised by a cyber attack and you didn't have access to any of your funds, would that be chaos for you? Or would you have stored some cash in the back? Or maybe you bank at more than one bank and you're not stuck into that particular realm of only having one place to be able to do business with. I think you would be beside yourself because of the uncertainty. You may think, well, the bank's protected and my money's protected and all that stuff, but yet, what if it took weeks before you could get access to your funds? Would you get, well, where would you be? I think you'd be beside yourself. You know, we serve a loving and graceful God, and just God alone in this particular situation that we may be in right now, or maybe we're not, is He pours out His compassion, and He is there to deliver us through anything that is trying to come against us in our life. Our choice is to rest in His profound acts of love because of who He is. Now realize, indeed, I would say, blessed are those who wait for Him. Blessed are those who wait for Him. I think the biggest point in this is that resting is not just resting, it's waiting too. Jesus did a lot of that. My thought, again, for today is, can you rest in the Lord as He has given me that point to do through this sabbatical that I've taken? When I say sabbatical, I mean I stepped back for a moment and reflected on, reevaluated, prayed, meditated, sought after His guidance to decide, should I even be here today sharing this with you? And while the world, I guess I hear so many people say going to hell in a handbasket, and my thought with that is that why insult the handbasket? Hell's already on its own. But my thought to you today is that, are you truly resting in the Lord? Have you made it a point of a personal relationship to seek out rest in Him, knowing that while all the things around us are giving us discouragement and upheaval in our lives, wanting to build bunkers, down in the ground. I mean, I could go on and on and on about things like that, but what I'm trying to say is that our trust is not in the things of this world. Our trust is in Him. And while we can't see, feel, or touch, or even smell, for that matter, the Lord in our midst right now, realize that He is there. And as we look down from heavens to earth, we're just a speck. Our lives are but just a mist, a moment in time. But our moment here is an opportunity for us to rest in Him and not in ourselves. Now, it may sound like I'm being redundant and repeating myself, but I realize that if God's people will rest in Him, what in the world will the rest of the world do when we don't look like that we're in the middle of the chaos, acting out and doing things because we're not sure or we're unsure about the God that we serve in this life that we live? Interesting. And listen, thank you for, again, taking the time to listen to what God has shared with me to share with you. And while I'm not the most popular person in the world, and I don't have all the fanfare that a lot of other pastors and priests and clergymen do, I realize that that's not what God has called me to do. He's called me to be a voice in a darkness so dark in this world right now. Everyone has lost their way from Him. Thanks again for listening, and glad to be back.